So full leadership piece to talk about. Imagine now where I sit in a flight deck and every pilot is able to relate to this. We've talked so much about the gradient in the flight deck on aircraft, the ability to be able to listen from individuals who come from all aspects of the operation is fundamental to us being able to have a successful outcome of whatever we do on a day-to-day basis. Imagine now saying, right, that is the concept we want to be able to embed in organizations, is this flat structure, the ability to be able to take information from all areas, to be able to make sure that decision makers and the people who are able to make the best decision. At the moment, that is generally diametrically opposed to business development, business education, whether it be an MBA or anything else. And that's where you need to look at other industries to be able to make this particular change. And I think the aviation industry is one. I think the military is another one, whereby you can find processes that allow for crises, development, efficiency to be taken, decisions to be made with the required amount of time, rather than just jumping to conclusions that you then push out.
Welcome to the Sixsess Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Welcome to the podcast. Richard Nanton, our guest today. Richard's director of Nanton Aviation Consulting and just a great person who's done an awful lot with their lives. And I'll ask Richard to introduce himself. Richard, over to you.
Barry, I was brought up in the Caribbean, started working for a small company in the London Docklands Airport back in 1989, resulted in me joining British Midland fully in 1991. And then I got my command on a 7-3. We all fairly quickly became training captains, became a TRI in 1999, a TRE.
Oh, and for the audience, a TRI is a type rating instructor. As you'll hear, Richard's gentle start in aviation went fairly stellar. So listen on, folks, because this is interesting.
But a company placed an advert for 2 TREs and 2 examiners to go out to the Middle East.
Spoiler alert, TRE is a type rating examiner on an aircraft.
Yes, most definitely.
But I will interject as appropriate, dear listener.
Oh, very good. Yeah, bring me up on the acronyms as and where required, because
we're both pilots, so acronyms.
That's really because, as I say, they were looking for two examiners to go out to the Middle East. The company was called Qatar Airways. At that stage, I heard about Qatar. I didn't know where it was specifically, and I applied and got accepted, got taken to Qatar in October of 2000. Lo and behold, during that whole interview process, there was something about Qatar that made me feel that there was an expansion plan on the cards. There was a lot of talk about trying to mimic Dubai, but I went out knowing that there was only going to be 8 aircraft in the fleet, 4 320s, 4 300s, and from 2002, all of a sudden, the airline started to expand.
And Richard, just jumping ahead, what position did you ultimately end up with in Qatar Airways?
I left there 13 years later as Vice President of Flight Operations.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. This is the shared retiring Captain Richard Nanton, who joined Qatar Airways, one of the most successful airlines in the world, right at the start, and ended up as, say again, Richard?
As Vice President of Flight Operations, yes.
That's right. And then, just quickly, went to EasyJet. Is that correct?
So the career at Qatar basically took me through a whole series of different scenarios and different roles. I left there with 125 aircraft and 2,500 pilots as part and parcel of the group that I managed. In 2013, I'd been out in Qatar for quite a long period of time, and the family were back in the UK. So again, there was an opportunity. A company called EasyJet was looking for chief pilot. I applied, and I ended up being accepted to be chief pilot, and I joined EasyJet in 2013 to get experience within a low-cost carrier.
So just to summarize then, you were the Vice President of Operations, Flight Operations for Qatar Airways, straight into Chief Pilot of EasyJet.
Yes.
Just skipping one step further, you then went to Thomas Cook, is that correct?
Yeah. So they came knocking in 2016.
And where did you end up with Thomas Cook, Richard?
They were looking for a director of flight operations.
So you ended up as I
ended up as the director of flight operations at Thomas Cook.
Right. So we've now got this fledgling first officer in British Midland is now the vice president of flight operations for Qatar Airways, now with 2,000 pilots. How many aircraft? Hundreds.
We had 125 when I left, yeah.
125. Chief pilot of EasyJet, and then the director of flight operations for Thomas Cook Airlines. I just wanted to jump those three stepping stones fairly rapidly for our listener and viewers, Richard, just to demonstrate actually, A, how modest you are, but B, what an extraordinary career you've had. And after Thomas Cook, what happened? Where did you end up next? And in what position? What did your position end up as?
So in 2018, so take one step back, 2017, Thomas Cook went through quite a bit of industrial strife. We had an unfortunate strike with the pilots. We, as a group, managed to overcome that. And in 2018, my job was then to work with the pilots, make sure that the industrial strife we'd seen in 2017 was undone. And I managed to do that by the end of 2018. There was a requirement, though, I felt at that stage for change probably within the department, within Thomas Cook. As a result of that, there was an opportunity that came up to move to India to work with Go Air to help develop their flight operations department, which was wanting to expand quite rapidly. So I decided, okay, fine. If I'm going to do one more move, it was probably now. And as a result of that, in 2019, I moved to India, where I worked for a year where primarily helping support their growth, their development. They wanted to move from roughly 35 aircraft fleet to one of 50. And it's how we were able to ramp up that operation over quite a short period of time to be able to make that as effective as possible. There were obviously a significant number of challenges within the fleet because all of their fleet revolved around Pratt & Whitney engine derivatives of the 320neo. The engines had challenges, particularly in the Indian operation, which meant quite a substantial amount of the fleet was grounded. Over that 12-month period, we were able to get pretty much all of the aircraft that were required to be flown. And by the end of 2019, I felt the time was right for me to be able to move out on my own and set up my own consultancy.
Right. And so your activities now, if we can have a quick summary of your activities now and how they interplay with Nanton Aviation Consulting.
Sure. So where I saw my greatest strengths is all of the bits that we've done in the past from 2000 when I joined Qatar through to 2020 when I came back from India. The experience of both working in multicultural airlines at the forefront of operational management within organizations which have been known for both expansion, innovation, development of individuals. Even with the Thomas Cook strike, we look to innovate and try and change the way we worked and engaged the pilots. All of that led me to a position where I felt, I could now move myself to be able to set up a consultancy whereby I could offer operational support, whether it be in post-holder positions for both training, flight ops, offer support for technical development, whether it be introduction of new aircraft, new airline startups, etc., or even just down to management, leadership development, working with employee groups to be able to help develop them.
You're involved quite heavily in interest-based negotiation and industrial relations. That's, for many people, be quite a new concept. Can you just cover for us what that involves and why it's important, not only for the airline industry,
Sure.
which it is, but also for the broader industrial sectors that work around the UK?
So when we had the strike in 2017 with Thomas Cook, one thing that was clear was cultural change within not only the department, but within the airline needed to take place. We felt, particularly after the strike had been settled, that there needed to be a revised way of working that put employees into a position whereby everybody recognized the airline or the organization was a team. We're all working towards the same end goals, even though the communication had broken down in 2017, and that was the fundamental reason for the strike. We felt that if we were able to bring groups, whether it be pilots or the whole organization, together to be able to understand the outcome of what we do as individuals, is to be able to secure our roles, our jobs, the future of the organization. That was going to be a fundamental that we all signed up to, because there is nobody who sets out not to make an organization a success. As a result of that, cultural change needed to be undertaken. But part and parcel of that cultural change is if you could develop interests that are common to everybody, you can actually see a joint outcome that will potentially allow people at the front end of the business, so people who are working on a day-to-day basis, understand the business the best, able to develop, put in place ideas, concepts, and areas that they want to see develop that will probably bring benefits to the organization through more efficiency and greater change. That would allow everybody to at least understand their roles, have the capability of understanding what goes on in the company, and at the same time affect the cultural change that you want to see, which is basically everybody being part and parcel of the organization, rather than management sitting on one side, individual groups within the employee section sitting on another side, and the two working at loggerheads because they don't talk the same language.
And that's certainly my own experience from industrial relations. That's kind of where traditionally negotiations have started with two groups of people sitting with crossed arms on either side of the table and not really trusting each other to talk about the substantive common elements of interest. I had a situation shortly after September the 11th where that was a familiar picture. And one of the first things that we did was to actually push aside the barriers and open up the common interest and find out where the common areas of interest were, which were substantial, actually, and then find a way forward. And I guess that's the same.
That's exactly the same principle. What I was going to say, though, and you and I have both been pilots for long enough. Pilots do a job whereby they take groups and teams out and operate on a remote basis. Not only do they take teams out, but they're also responsible for those teams, have a huge amount of responsibility, but then come back and then are told to do X, Y, and Z. So there's a disproportionate lack of how should I say, self-actualization in the job because of the fact that you've got this, go as a remote individual, take full accountability, come back into an organization when you land, and then you're told how things operate. They want to be involved. The pilots throughout history, whether we go back to the beginning of industrial relations, they've always wanted to be involved. Now, you can see that as two ways. Either it's a challenge to management because you feel that they want to take on or want to have more power, or you can harness that power and say, okay, fine, we use that for the end goal. Allow them to be involved, allow them to be able to be part and parcel of the development of the organization. And it was that latter choice that I think, even in 2018, we saw a lot of traction from. We saw a change, we saw a cultural change within the department. Obviously, the cultural change could then be rolled out to other areas. And, in the work I've done in this, I've seen this happen in other organizations, such as the Royal Mail during a time period. And I know they've obviously come in for a lot of discussion over the way they treated some of the postmasters. But if you look at what they had done in terms of creating equal covenants and contracts that would work for individuals and groups to be able to help develop the organization, it does work. And, what you want to do is harness that capability, but harnessing that as results in a change, and that change must have a change of communication as well.
Absolutely. This is, as you and I have discussed at length, and more about that later, dear listener, but there's a great deal of commonality between what Richard does in Nanton Aviation Consulting and what we do in Sixsess in terms of engaging the people of the organization to bring about the changes required and the innovation required within the organization. The traditional sort of management of change and transformation and culture starts with you have a small group of people basically work on a project. They don't involve anybody else. They then tell people that it's usually the same group of people, the same sort of select few. They then think about the management of it, but they don't really apply any leadership. And then they make people have to do it, and they sell it on the basis of logical arguments, basically appeal to the head. And the approach that Richard and I have been discussing is broadens that out so that you have leadership and management. And leadership is very important. We'll discuss that perhaps in another podcast because it's a full subject. It's not just a select few, but as Richard has just described here, it's the select few and the diverse many within the organization, a diagonal slice across the organization. So you're actually identifying, pulling leadership from around the organization, not least, as you said earlier, Richard, the people right at the front line, the people who are in direct contact with the customer, who often very, very much see what the C-suite and the back office don't. And then, and the elements that are really important is that the change, is owned by the diverse many who are out there working on it, but also it appeals to their emotions and that people want to do it. And that I think summarizes interest-based discussion and negotiation, doesn't it?
Reverse engineer everything that we've been talking about. If I've got a project and I want efficiency changes, why don't we go to the front end and work backwards rather than me coming up with something in my office and say, you know what, that's a good idea. Let's try and project manage that in. Because now you've got all the barriers, all the issues and challenges of communication. How do you communicate it? How do you get the change management process in place? If the change management process is one that's being accepted, half your battle as a project manager has already been undone.
And in fact, moving beyond just change management tends to deal with, if you like, the fundamental process of change. But the change leadership there, because change, the domain of leaders is the future. It's actually their job, their responsibility is change. And to lead that change, to create the vision, and then hand it to the organization and the diverse many within the organization to actually realize it. And then you're getting that organizational alignment, isn't it? The mechanism that we've discussed.
Most definitely. And I'll just go back to one bit that requires a fundamental change in leadership, because right from the Industrial Revolution all the way down, we've always been told the CEO, the guy at the top of the company, must be the one that's delivering, whereas the guys at the bottom end, the people who need to be doing the work. It's a fundamental change that we have an opportunity to be able to undertake now. But it does take a change from where we've sat as in management training, management techniques, because all of those have been built out of an era whereby it was one person who told everybody else how to do things.
And there's a very contemporaneous example of that at the moment with the situation where we've had the Alaska Airlines door plug blowout and the questions over quality control systems. People on the assembly line have been calling this out for years, and it doesn't seem to have landed in the right spot. That now is an opportunity, I think, where a safety critical organization can and should be looking to the diverse many to trust the people within the organization to deliver what is fundamental to it, which is a safe product that the stakeholder in seat 29A, incidentally, that's the seat where the door plug blew out, feels totally confident. And we had this flying as captains that fundamentally the ultimate stakeholder is the person sitting on board your airplane.
Most definitely. And Barry, going back to that, as you say, it's a full leadership piece as well to be able to talk about. But imagine now where I sit in the flight deck, and every pilot is able to relate to this. We've talked so much about the gradient in the flight deck on aircraft, the ability to be able to listen from individuals who come from all aspects of the operation is fundamental to us being able to have a successful outcome of whatever we do on a day-to-day basis. Imagine now saying, right, that is the concept we want to be able to embed in organizations, is this flat structure, an ability to be able to take information from all areas, to be able to make sure that decision makers and the people who have the outcomes at their best heart are able to make the best decision. At the moment, what I'd say is that is generally diametrically opposed to business development, business education, whether it be an MBA or anything else. And that's where, as I say, you need to look at other industries to be able to make this particular change. And I think the aviation industry is one. I think the military is another one, whereby you can find processes that allow for crises, development, efficiency to be able to be taken, decisions to be able to be made with the required amount of time, rather than just jumping to conclusions that you then sort of push out.
And leadership is another discussion point. And I think what we'll do, Richard, is leave that for the next time we talk. And just as disclosure, Richard, Nanton Aviation and Sixsess Consultancy are now working together as strategic partners because we've got so many synergies. We specialize in change, transformation, leadership, and aviation. Richard specializes in all the stuff that he's just discussed, interest-based negotiation. So what I'm proposing is that we'll speak to Richard again about leadership, given that his stellar track record in terms of positions held as Vice President Flight Operations for Qatar, Chief Pilot EasyJet, Director of Flight Operations for Thomas Cook Airlines and others. It doesn't stop there. Richard's still flying, actually, as a captain and conducting his aviation consultancy. So, Richard, if you're happy and you're happy to come back to discuss leadership, we'd love to have you on the show and we can then discuss and fill that out further.
Brilliant, Barry. Very happy to. I look forward to another coffee.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, from me, Barry Eustance, and Richard Nanton, Nanton Aviation Consultancy, thank you for joining us on the Just Great People podcast. We'll have Richard on again very, very soon, trust me. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Barry. Cheers.
Thank you. If you'd like to know more about the Sixsess Consultancy's People, Change, Leadership and Management Framework, please simply click on the QR code or in the link in the show notes below. And please do remember to like and subscribe the Just Great People podcast. Thank you. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Sixsess Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.